Kris and Alexander. We're going to be doing a little Hobtown chat in English today with you guys. So maybe Alex, you're the illustrator. Kris, you're the writer, so that everyone knows. And so yeah, before we go any further, I'd like to know how you would describe the Hobtown books to someone who has no idea what they're about. Like, what's the series' overall premise?
Do you want me to start, AJ?
Yeah, sure.
In my mind, I sort of think of it as like the world as children see it, if it were real. Children see adults and they assume they're up to all kinds of horrible, evil stuff, or that they're secretly in some gang, or that there's monsters, and Hobtown is the idea of what if that's real. That's my idea, but it's difficult to talk about what it's all about, because I think each book we want to be its own thing, and we want them to sort of operate in different ways and work within different genres. But I'm dying to hear what your answer is, Alex.
Yeah, it is kind of difficult to come up with a concise little elevator pitch about it. I think it's about where we are in Nova Scotia in a way. It's supposed to kind of represent a certain feeling that a person would get here if they spent enough time. People think that it's pretty lighthouses and oceanscapes, and it is, but there's kind of a strange darkness to the Maritimes as a whole, and each province kind of has its own version of that. So it's kind of about that. It's like a weird little town where mystery is like a part of the culture of the town. And it's kind of a fun thing for everybody. And the high school has a detective club, which our kids are a part of. Not our kids, I mean the kids that we made in the book. And they start to realize that the reason why this mystery culture exists is a bit darker than they think, and it's kind of rooted in a dark history.
Yeah, I think small towns are a big part of it. I think its themes are about how, I think you said quaintness, Alex, and lighthouses, and the idea that the kind of pretty surface level world has a lot of scarier stuff underneath it. And I think especially for us, being when we were young, we were creative, artistic people, and we were from small towns. A lot of the book really is about being bright and curious in a place that kind of doesn't want you to be necessarily, and about growing up in that world. That doesn't fit easily in the back of a book. It's kind of a big meandering answer, but
yeah, but it's not an elevator pitch, but it's a good pitch though. I mean, old school teen detective novels like the Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys books were obvious reference points for you going in, I think. What is it that made you want to write your own version of these sort of stories?
I think something that I heard Kris say a long time ago about like why we're even doing this kind of thing is that you want, when you're making something, you obviously, the obvious thing is you want to make something that you wish existed in the world. And for me, whenever I saw like the old Nancy Drews and the old Hardy Boys and stuff like that, was that they always had like a really unique aura about them, all that pulp stuff, the covers and the illustrations inside when you're a kid and you leaf through it. But I think the first time I ever read one was when I started thinking about wanting to do this story, and it wasn't very good. and I think I really like what I always wanted was one of these books that was as spooky in the story as it was kind of in its in its packaging and its aesthetic. So that's, yeah, and also all pictures. So that's kind of where I started from with the whole Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys thing.
A thing Alex said before that I really liked was that he loved the artwork when he was looking at the pictures, some of those old ink drawings. And I think in some way his art tries to evoke that stuff in a really interesting way. For me, I really like the idea of taking those kind of those characters like a Nancy Drew or a Tom Swift or the Hardy Boys, and you imagine, just make them a little bit more realistic. You know, so if you're perfect, like Nancy Drew is perfect, our character Dana, what does it mean if you're perfect? It means you're probably put a lot of pressure on yourself. You're probably pretty stressed out. You might even be angry all the time. You might be, we don't want to say she's, you know, necessarily autistic or something, but her fixation on mystery is something that it's almost a flaw, you know. And the Hardy Boys, famously, those two brothers are so alike that you can't tell them apart. One has brown hair, one has blonde hair. So we wanted to make sure that they're very, very different characters. And I think even with Sam, when you think of Johnny Quest or those kind of characters, that's almost like a little boy in an abusive relationship with his father, who's just dragged everywhere and made to do all this stuff. He's not going to school. He doesn't know how to behave with other kids his age. So those are the kind of realistic, not that Hobtown's realistic, but those are the realistic elements that we like to bring out of those pulp stories.
So I'm sort of curious because who had the idea at first between you two? Who came up with the?
We were living together, and I had the idea first. I don't know exactly when I thought of it. We drove to Maine once. This would have been like 12 or 13 years ago. We drove to Maine once to visit the friend that gave Kris that puppet behind him, actually. And just kind of driving through Maine, and you know, Maine is like, that's the home state of Stephen King's stuff. And it's like driving through and being like, wow, this place really is spooky. And then being like, well, so is here, you know? So I started trying to develop it. And at the time I was in art school. And I was constantly bugging Kris about how to write it. Cause it's, you know, everybody thinks they can write, but it's really, really hard, especially a mystery story where everything has to fit together and work. Everything has to work, you know? And I had a really hard time until Kris at one point was just like, here's a script. And he had written, and it was exactly, or if well, way more actually than I ever thought the story could be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it a little differently because I think there was more back and forth where you wanted feedback, and I would work on this thing with you and talk about what could happen or what characters could be or whatnot. And I remember that you wanted to quit at some point, and I was like, fine, just don't do it then. I really like this idea. I like your idea, and I want to work on it together with you. And I found the email the other day that I sent him where it's like, here's what all the characters should be. Here's what we need to do. And let's do it. And it went from there.
So we've mentioned Nancy Drew, we've mentioned the Hardy Boys, but it feels like you're drawing from a lot more sources. Like the case of the Missing Men really has this sort of a Twin Peaks vibe to it. The Cursed Hermit, to me, it reminded me of like Dario Argento's Suspiria. Are these references something that you consciously go for, or are they more like an underlying inspiration to you when working on the book?
I mean, I think we're fans of stories, and we're fans of horror. And so, you know, if you're writing about a weird small town, it ends up, you know, Twin Peaks ends up being something that we could compare to. And Suspiria is definitely, you know, we love Dario Argento, and that's, you know, I made sure I was like, Alex, when you design Naughty Pines, the school that they go to in the second book, I was like, make sure there's a lot of incredible wallpaper, because we want to remind people of that, you know, because we love that so much. So I mean, we are inspired by a lot of different things, but for me, I think some of the weirdest, most interesting stuff. I have a whole pile here of folklore books. I think the strangest, most interesting stuff that we're inspired by is the folklore of the Maritimes, of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and Newfoundland. because it's unlike anything that I've read before. And something amazing happened when we were coming up with this. Is Alex had all these ideas about little creatures that were invading people's lives and doing dastardly things in a small town. And I was reading this stuff at the same time, and I was like, it's all the same, and it's in your mind, and it ended up being part of the folklore. And so those are the things that I try to bring together. So there's the references. I don't know if anyone knows any of the references, but the majority of the references, I think, are to books like As True As I'm Sitting Here, and you know, a lot of stranger stuff. The Seven-Headed Beast, Tales from Acadia and Cape Breton.
That's a weird cover.
Yeah. Oh, that's the weirdest one. It looks like olives.
Yeah, like what is
square olives?
Yeah. And there's stuff that you like, you know, that like not necessarily didn't inspire me when I first began, but like I see stuff around constantly that kind of validates kind of what we're doing. Like, you know, I think it would have been only a year or two ago that I discovered like Junji Ito, and I was like, oh, well, that's nice. That's nice that somebody's doing this kind of thing, and it's like a big deal, you know. And yeah, that's validating. Other things like the kind of like body horror that you would see in Cronenberg,
yeah,
I think is a big influence on us. Anything that makes you feel weird. We just really hope to make people feel weird. That's the big thing.
I think that's right.
So yeah, when we started working on translating these books, one of you sent me this huge, and I mean huge document, which basically functioned as like a very detailed guide to the Hobtown Mysteries universe. And that's the moment where I was like, okay, this is how ambitious these guys are. This is how much care has gone into the conception of this. And I mean, I'm a writer myself, and I was like, I've never done anything like that on one of my projects. And I was like, from a writer's perspective, do you come up like ideas for stories first, or did you go at it like from a more general worlding perspective?
Well, you know, Alex and I are working class artists, so we've spent a lot of time working in a bar. Just recently, I finally was able to quit after 11 or 12 years. But we both worked there together, and I made sure we were scheduled every Wednesday night. And every Wednesday night for years, we stood side by side, and I'd be like, "Hey, I had this idea. What do you think about this?" And then we would sort of talk about it and riff on it. And I would go home and I would make sure that there was a record of it so that no one forgot about it. And as we discussed things, and I would say, "What do you think about this idea?" And if he would give me something, I would make sure that it wouldn't be forgotten. So I would make sure there's a home in. So what Alexander was talking about is we have a Google document that's, I don't know, 100 some pages or something, where we dump those ideas and we write little biographies. And you know, some of my horrible drawings are in there for Alex so that he can make it into something beautiful.
Really good.
I love the drawings. Yeah, Kris has a whole Bible. Do you have it there, Kris? He has like a big, thick Hobtown Bible that he jots down all this insanity.
It looks really, it's big, but it's not filled.
But this is something that Kris has always done ever since we were kids. It would be like just creating whole universes and you know, like what every character wore every day or whatever. It was always incredibly extensive. There's whole universes that he created that I was invited into. It was a lot of fun growing up.
Yeah, because you guys are childhood friends, and I think it really shows in the way that you seem to work together. Like, does it feel like you're making these books is like an extension of like playing together or making up stories when you were kids?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being a writer or a creative person is like, it's like that. It's like being if you're any good at it, you get to sell your little imaginary friends to people. You know, you get to spend time making imaginary people, putting them in imaginary peril, and imagining what happens. And if other people like it, you can keep doing that. And I think that's the greatest job in the world. And I get to do it with my best friend from when we were 6. And when we were little kids, we were doing the same thing. You know, we were out on the playground making punching and kicking noises and explosion noises, and pretending we were saving the universe. But I was a strange kid who wrote down all of that stuff. So my adult life is just a complete extension of that, I think.
Kris like would like, it was almost like you were a playwright when we were kids. Like Kris would, we would act out his stories during recess and lunchtime. Like not just me, but like a bunch of our friends. Like we would be running around the schoolyard, like playing as you know, we got to kind of come up with our own characters. And then, you know, I was really bad for like fighting the other friends, and Kris would have to mediate between those things.
I don't know what's lamer, that I thought I had to do that or that you followed along with the other people.
But yeah, it is like the funnest thing I think that you can do, is to imagine stories. And yeah, it is totally an extension. You're right.
Yeah, I really like when I come to Alex with an idea, or he comes to me with one, and we just sort of together get to imagine what these characters who we really love are going to do with it. And something that's, you know, we love each other, and we love these characters a lot too. So when you're making this stuff, it ends up being really emotional. Like there's a character, and I was talking about what's going to happen to them, and Alex was like, "Oh no!" I was like, "Well, we don't have to do it. We don't have to do it." And he's like, "No, we should."
Yeah. They really are almost kind of like our kids in a way. Like when I was joking earlier, and yeah, it does hurt when that happens, but it's necessary for the story. I understand.
You've mentioned earlier about the way that you want all the books to be sort of like their own thing. I think it really works. They work well in and out of themselves, but they still always hint at a more coherent, overarching storyline. Is that balance like something you need to think about a lot while you're writing, while you're like planning out the books as like individual books and then as a series?
For me, on the writing side of things, once we made the first one, which is a giant book and it's 300 pages, and we worked on it for 6 years or something like that, a really long time. We wanted to make another one, and we wanted to, we almost called it the sophomore curse, because that's what happens with stories. When you write a sequel, it sucks. And we wanted to avoid the sophomore curse. And one of the ways we wanted to do it was to differentiate the story. So instead of a whole cast of kids, we took 2. Instead of taking place in this kooky town that everyone got familiar with, we wanted to go away from it. Instead of being about the present, a lot of it's about the past. And we wanted to make it a bigger story, even though it's shorter. And we just tried to do everything you're not supposed to do in making that second one. But we are interested in having an overarching story and something that people can follow along. But I think what we really like doing, or what I like doing when I'm writing, is showing, you know, because everyone who reads it has their own idea of what happens next. I'm interested in going to another place that I hope no one else saw coming. And that's kind of what my mission statement is with the script.
Yeah, I think whenever you're doing a series like this that kind of has, you know, an established aesthetic, and there's always a fear that you're just going to keep repeating yourself. And, you know, nobody really wants to do that. So, yeah, I think we each, when we're kind of doing our jobs with this, are thinking about what what is this one going to be? What is this book going to be to me? And what am I going to do differently than I did the last one? I think it's just it's also just kind of necessary if you're going to make a life of doing this kind of thing, that you keep doing that too, or else, I don't know, especially like when you're drawing hundreds of panels, you're just going crazy if you don't try new things.
Yeah, a thing I always try to do in all of these is give something to Alex as a project. I'm like, all right, this is the thing for you. I need you to come up with the way the ghost looks, or in the second book, there is this kaleidoscope effect, and I was like, I don't really know what he'll do with this, but I know whatever it is, it'll be special. And it's some of my favorite stuff that he's ever done. And so that's not necessarily something you would see in the first book, but because it's a different point of view, that's another thing that we sort of haven't really talked about much, is we want each book to be related to the little character on the spine. So the first one really is in a lot of ways Sam's story, even if he's not, he's sort of sharing the main character slot. But the second one definitely is about Pauline, and making it about her meant that we had to sort of change some things about the aesthetics and how it works. And I think Alex did a really excellent job, sort of honing the style to suit that character.
Kris bought me this kaleidoscope, and I laid on my back and looked through it for like a couple hours. I was like, how are you going to do that? And yeah, it's definitely a fun project.
Just before I had a child too. So I went to a toy store and bought that for my 35-year-old friend.
Yeah, that's sometimes, as a writer myself, some of like my favorite parts in books that I've written that got illustrated afterwards are the parts where I'm like, you do this for like a few pages, and like I just want to see what you'll do with it. But I'm wondering, how does the process really work between you guys? Like, Alexander, how much are you involved like in the writing process, and then what input does Kris have like on the visual aspect? Like, is he really precise about layout and stuff like that, or is it more free form, as like a sort of a novel that you'd have to adapt?
I think it's there's a balance there that is struck. I think Kris has certain parts that are fairly, like, he's like, this is what it, and it still won't obviously end up being exactly as he envisioned. And honestly, I don't think you've very rarely ever given me a hard time when it doesn't turn out exactly how you said it. But there are some things that are written in the script fairly specifically, and then there are other parts where Kris is just like, go nuts in this part, and it's kind of just like blank. There's barely anything written there, and usually those parts are the parts that are more visual. If a character is having a dream or a hallucination, that's kind of a chance that I get to kind of go wild with it. So yeah, there's a strong balance there. With the writing, I think I've had a little bit of input. There's parts of the books where I'm like, man, Kris, that's so cool, and Kris will be like, yeah, that you told me that idea like 5 years ago. I'm like, oh, I have a really bad memory. So that happens as well. But pretty much all of the character writing and the plot work, that's Kris. That's not my skill set.
I think one of the really special things that happened with Alex and I, and it is because we're friends and we're together a lot, or we used to be before the bug happened. But Alex will often draw things, so he'll create a crowd scene or something like that, and I'll see a character, and I'll be like, that is the best little head I've ever seen. Who is that? And Alex is like, that's the guy who's over there. And I'm like, I need that character. That's you. I'm going to take that and you're going to become a character now. And that's happened so many times, and with so many different things too, where I have an idea and it's in the script, and then Alex has an interpretation of it, which sometimes a misinterpretation even, that I'm like, this is better. This is better than anything I ever came up with. And I'm so happy to, to take it out and put it back in again at a later date, or, sort of pronounce something, or, I don't want, I'm always asking Alex, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Because I genuinely want his input. And I'm really interested in his ideas. So things that, like you said, things that you said years ago, I'm still thinking about them, and I'm obsessed with them because they're such great ideas. And I want to make sure, because it did come from you. Its genesis is from you in our horrible apartment when you're laying on the floor feeling depressed. And I want to do honor and justice to those ideas and dreams that you had, and that you are still having.
Yeah, so just for anybody who does read these books, and you read the second one, go back in the first one, and you'll probably be able to find a lot of the characters that are in that second one, especially like the kids. They show up in a few little scenes, some of them only in like a very small face in one scene. So it's just that kind of thing, I think, is just a fun gift to give to readers, so that they can reread the books, that they spent money on.
No one has read them more than I have, and I'm still seeing stuff every day when I'm working on these that I've never seen before. Tiny little things that Alex has added on the walls and like background characters, and I'm still amazed by the richness that he put into it.
Translating them was a lot like.
Oh, sorry, I think we lost you
every there. Time I would read it again, I'd see new things. Oh yeah. I was just saying, like, that's right, because like when I was translating, I mean, every time I was reading it, I was like, oh, I didn't notice that, and then it sort of changed my perception. And sometimes I had to like adjust things because I was like, oh, there's so much stuff. Like the density of it is crazy. The art style sort of retro feel, it really matches the tone of the books. And I was wondering, like, how much of your natural drawing style and how much of that is like you as an illustrator trying to be like, okay, this is what these books needs, so this is how I need to draw this. I mean,
I've always been I've never been one of those cartoonists that like kind of, I mean, everybody, of course, just because of their hand and the way that they move it, has like a style when they're doing visual art. But I've never really had, I'm not a Darwin Cook or something like that, I don't have like a style that just comes out. It's usually when I'm doing it, it's just like dependent on what the story is. And I don't think I really found the style for these books, that like finding the balance between the really fastidious illustration, the balance between that and more of an economic cartooning that needs to happen. I don't think that really happened until like most of the way through the first book. And if somebody's read them, they probably noticed that the second book is a lot more consistent, and that is kind of the style. But yeah, there's a lot of things in there. Like I said before, I wanted it to be somewhat reminiscent of the black and white line drawings that people would have seen in the old Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys books. But also there's like definitely a strong manga aspect to a lot of it, like in terms of like how a lot of the Japanese storytelling will give you a nice moment of silence with scenery and space, and really focuses a lot on timing and rhythm, and mood and things like that. And I mean, that's what you can do in a graphic novel. You have all the time in the world, as much time as you want to do that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm not really sure if that answers your question, but Style
yeah,
is
go ahead.
something that I've always kind of, I've never really had a good grasp of. It's just kind of what's necessary for the story.
Alex, I think you have an amazing ability to sort of turn up the realism when you need it, and then turn it way, way, way down when you don't. And what I really love about Alex's style is sometimes if you just need to see a body doing something, he might focus on just one aspect, like a hand or something like that. And other times, if you know, it's like a really technical piece of machinery, he will go and figure it out and draw it because it's important for him to be accurate in those ways. You know, in the Cursed Hermit, the characters, as they become more evil, all the boys and girls, their features change pretty drastically, where they go from this more realistic looking cartooning to they sort of start to look like Walt Disney villains, you know, where anyone who's a little bit chubby is really chubby, or anyone who's pointy is suddenly really pointy. And there's that amazing moment where they all go back to normal, and it happens from one panel to the next. And when you see it, it feels like magic has taken place, where you're like, because I didn't tell him to do any of that. That's all his own style, where he's bringing in a fine art background with a real interest in cartooning, and moving those things back and forth from the foreground. And I think that's something that's really special.
Yeah, it's a funny thing with that. Like, again, talking about style, like a smart thing to do as a cartoonist is to have like a marketable style that people can see and know that it's you and that kind of thing. But it's just never really been of interest to me. And I think that I don't know, you're building a tool set for yourself, and I guess that's one of mine. It's fun. It really comes down to it's just more fun that way, is to be able, I mean, like in the first book, I broke a lot of rules of cartooning. Like there's that idea with cartooning that you should be able to recognize a character by its silhouette.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when you think of all like the most iconic cartoons, you definitely can. But for me, there's that kind of illustration side where the next day you see the kids, like Dana's got a different hairstyle and is, you know, wearing a completely different thing, and all the characters kind of change over time, which to me is kind of more accurate to what high school is like. Everybody like just changes so rapidly, and that's just something that happens. So that's something that I didn't think about until afterwards.
From a, do you guys see me? Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I was wondering if no connection. Yeah, from a, maybe we've talked about art. Now we'll talk about storytelling. Kris, you also write short stories, and you seem to have an interest in shaking things up, like from a structural point of view. Like in the case of The Missing Man, I'm thinking of like the chapter 10, which is told from the perspective of all these kids being interviewed by a journalist. That's like very unexpected. When you're reading the book, you're like, oh, this chapter is going to be told in that way. That's surprising. And what is it that makes you go for these sort of narrative devices? And one of my questions is also like, because I've heard you talk about the next book, so can we expect a little bit more of those in the future?
Yeah, you know, I like sidestepping conventions. You know, if you go on Goodreads or something like that, you'll see reviews where people are like, I really liked it, except for the chapter where that stopped, it moved away from the kids or something like that. But to me, it's more interesting to imagine what happens in the story outside of the kids' limited point of view. And so that's something that I was totally interested in, and that's why I wrote that chapter. And I think, like Alex describes, doing different stylistic things to appease himself, I also do that. So it's more interesting to me, especially in those later parts of the story, where we all know a story has a conflict and rising action and a climax and a denouement. I'm interested in what happens up in that top part. For instance, in the Cursed Hermit, can we acknowledge how great that mask was? Did everyone see that?
Where's that? I didn't see a mask.
Oh, someone popped up who had a missing men paper plate mask with the, there he is.
Oh, I don't see that. I don't have the I don't have everybody on here. Oh, wow.
We have to, we have to acknowledge.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's incredible. Oh, wow.
That's great. What the hell was I saying? Oh, right.
Yeah, that's true, of course.
in The Cursed Hermit, I knew we would get to an ending where the sort of force of evil is coming in and the children have to withstand it. And I was watching Guardians of the Galaxy, I think the second one. And, you know, the hero and the villain, there's like energy flying around and they're all like, ah, and I was like, I hate this. I really hate this so much. So I was like, how do you have a showdown that's where the hero's trying to resist, that has nothing to do with I am so evil and here the energy shooting at you and I get to duck it, and that's how we came to the wagon idea. So in the second book, our heroine Pauline is being enticed into a wagon during colonial times by these evil forces, and she's just standing out in the cold, and she gets older and older and older, and she sees her children and all of the townspeople and herself under the wagon as this horrible wagon hag that's like, I'm you. And I wrote that for me because I didn't want to have a Guardians of the Galaxy ending. I wanted something that represented that horror and that touched on history, but also that I think no one would expect. And when Alex said that we create stuff for ourselves, in a lot of ways, that's the genesis of that. Is I that's something that I would appreciate in a story.
Do you also kind of do it? So now I'm the interviewer. Do you also kind of do it to like challenge yourself? Like in the saucer, I don't want to give it away yet because I'm not even barely even started drawing it. But the third one is a huge shakeup. Do you do it to kind of like also challenge yourself to get better?
Yeah. So I mean, to answer the question, in the third one, there is that specific dynamic that of I guess a narrative flourish, which is that we want to tell the story backwards. So we're really interested in starting at the ending. So you start at the end, and so almost like something like I don't know, Memento or Irreversible or one of those. It's not a unique idea, but it's really interesting to take a mystery story and start with, here's the solution to the mystery, and what does it look like as it develops in reverse chronological order. And then, because someone is a psychic, Pauline, what are the things that she's going to see out of order that will then make sense to us as we move this way? So that Alex, you're right that I did that because I'm stupid, and I made a nightmare headache for myself.
Well, you said it was the hardest thing you've written.
Yeah, it was. But I think it goes back to that question about how they hang together and how each story is fundamentally different. I want to keep making, they look like a Nancy Drew or they look like these pulp things, but we want each one to be sort of its own, not to get hoity-toity, but it's its own little art piece that operates in its own way. And I want to sort of take those narrative conventions and throw them out the window if we can. And it was really hard.
And it's just going to get harder and harder every book coming in. You're going to be like, I need to do even harder.
It'll get harder for Alex.
Yeah, I'll do a pop-up book at one point.
So one of the main themes for both of the books so far seems to be this idea that this community, it's built upon like a lie, which people they collectively adhere to. And this idea that hypocrisy is one of the building blocks of their society, that's a common theme for a lot of horror stories. And I was wondering, is that like something that you mentioned it like at the beginning of the interview, that it was something like about like growing up in Nova Scotia, and that's something that I also want to talk about. Like, how does it all fit together? Like these sort of themes.
For me, the big theme, and you probably see more of it in the second book. It is about reconciling with history, and history doesn't mean what's in a history book necessarily, but it could be what your parents have done, everything that came before you. It can be your mythology and folklore, sort of the spiritual things that exist around you. Coming to terms with those things is hard, and it's horrifying. And I think it's what all of us are doing all the time, and have always been doing, especially in Canada, where there's all these different nations and forces, and it's so complicated and strange. And the hypocrisy that you mentioned is something we're so interested in as the story progresses, because the children, the teenagers who are unraveling the mystery, they're doing the same thing that their parents did, who ended up sinning in some way in the pursuit of solving a mystery or finding a treasure or whatever it is. And I think reconciling with history makes you a hypocrite, because eventually history will move on and your actions will become historical. And I really love that idea. So that sort of answers your question on how things hang together from one story to the next. Mm-hmm. I think the history, even that within our own story, is something that we want to cultivate and take with us going forward, and make every little decision that a character makes count.
Yeah, there's I think that there's it's almost like a necessary ignorance that people have in order to function, of history, and the further you go back, the worse things get. But yeah, I think as you get older, or if you try to learn about history even a little bit as you get older, and that's kind of what our kids in the story are going through, is like Kris said, you realize that it's not this separate thing that is over here that you only read in books. You are a part of it. You are now a part of history every moment. Yeah, and that stuff's really, I mean, a big part of our books is sort of the colonial history and other histories of, again, this place that we live in. This is kind of the first place that the old world met the new world, so to speak. I don't know if those terms really mean anything anymore, but yeah, it's stuff that I don't think, we don't want to, we don't really want to shove our opinions on anything like that in people's faces. If our story is based in a place, and that place's history is going to play a huge role in it, especially if that place is really important to the story itself.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm interested in the way that we're all trapped in history. You can't escape it, and I think we ended up drawing upon. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but in Halifax, Lord Cornwallis, he's a statue who's really prominent, and there's all kinds of stuff here named after him. And our Lord Hob, our sort of evil colonial figure, ended up looking in some way almost exactly like Lord Cornwallis. Yeah. And it was really interesting that in the story there's a statue that you see it defaced at the end of it, and that was something that it happened a lot over the course of years. But as we were writing it, the statue literally died. It was pulled up from the ground, and all this stuff was renamed. And it really feels like in some way the horror of the story is reflecting the horror of the moment, which is reconciling in real terms with it's a comic book, so they're ghosts and monsters and fleshy, creepy things. But I think in order for horror to work, it has to have a monster that's tied to something emotional, and it's I think very Canadian. it's tied to that stuff.
Yeah. Maybe if we have any questions from the audience, we've been going at it for like maybe 45 minutes or so. So yeah, if there are any questions from the audience, you can go ahead.
I have something. First, thank you guys. It's really interesting to hear you talk about your books, because I spend so much time reading and rereading them and making modification and rewriting stuff. So I feel like I know the characters a lot, and like Kris, you said earlier, I still find some details that every time I'm reading it, I find new details. It's what I like. You about Alexander, your work is you're so generous in your drawings, and it's really fun, and it's a book you want to go back and more. My question is not that, is Alexander. If I'm not mistaken, the covers, you painted them on canvas?
I painted them on panels.
I have one here.
Yeah. I'm not the smoothest painter in the world, but yeah, I wanted them to have some texture to them. I also have.
Nice.
I want this one. I want that.
Really nice. And do you paint as for fun, or just for those covers?
No, not as much as I probably should. I think painting's good for you as an artist, but I don't get around to it as much. I find it very trying because I'm so used to the immediacy of working with pen and ink, and painting, it takes so much more patience and, you know, doing layers and stuff like that. So I should be doing it more, but I'm going to be starting soon on the cover for the third book. So yeah, I got to get my head into that space again.
Thanks.
Hi, Francois.
Are there any other questions? Chloé, est-ce qu'il y a des questions dans le chat?
Non, il n'y en a pas.
No? Okay.
Well,
I can ask a question.
Oh, here's one.
Hi. I'm just really curious, you held up those books at the beginning about maritime folklore. I'm wondering if you could share any kind of details about what kind of things are inspiring you there.
Oh, well, I have a lot. I have this whole top row, and then down here is maritime folklore. It became a sort of a hobby at some point because they're often unique items. So they'll be like coil bound, like homemade cookbooks almost. Some of them, and some of them you might see and you'll never see it again because it doesn't even have an ISBN. It's just lost. It's just a handmade item. What I like most about them is often they don't follow a straight narrative line. So often it's a meandering story because a lot of it is oral folk tales. So it's a story that begins in a place where it doesn't matter and it goes to a place that you don't expect before it comes back to a place you never expected it to go. And I really like that stuff. This book is in the public domain. Mary Fraser, who might be related to my wife. Her mother's her family name is Fraser. So I don't know if I've married into this or not. Cape Breton's not that big of a place, but a lot of stuff in here specifically about fairies is a huge inspiration for us. And one of the things I like most is that fairies are this thing that exists in every culture. And it's so fascinating when you look at comparative mythology that the French, the English, the Celts, the Vikings, the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, everyone in the world has these little people, and I think there's a reason for that. I'm not going to tell you, but that's the thing that I like most. Cool. Alex, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I guess just in terms when you're talking about the how, I don't know what a good word for it would be, like the clunkiness of those stories and the way they're told. We did like a 4-page little thing in an anthology. Do I have that around? That we did with Conundrum, where it kind of vaguely takes place, or not so vaguely takes place, inside the kind of the Hobtown universe. And it's being narrated by a now deceased patron of the bar that Kris and I, that he used to work at, that I still work at. And that to us is kind of how a lot of these stories get passed on, and where they originate is just from, I don't know, some old drunk, and then they build from there. And that's a really fun part of them too.
Yeah. Thanks so much. This is like my favorite series ever so far. Can't wait.
Thanks so much. Means the world.
Yeah, all folklore seems to come from like drunken histories being misremembered the day after, right?
Yeah, totally.
Are there any more questions?
I have a question. Sorry, guys. I had to pop in and out throughout the evening as you were going on. So if someone asked this, I'm sorry. But especially in the last book, it seemed like you guys were really laying the seeds of kind of like future things to come in the Hobtown universe. And I'm wondering, how much of it do you have planned out? Like, how far in the future do you envision it? You know, do you have like a vision? You're like, okay, it's like 5 books and we know what's going to happen, or is it more amorphous than that?
I have a lot of plans. I have a lot of notes and drawings and all kinds of ideas, but I never want to make it so that in the moment I can't just get rid of it. So we do have ideas about where we're going and things we're trying to build. But if when it comes down to it, it doesn't work, I'm more than happy to get rid of it. And that's happened more than once. You might have heard my answer earlier, but Alex has all kinds of great ideas, and I feel like I'm a cultivator of those ideas too, because Alex will just forget them, and I'm not insulting him. He'll say it before anyone. Yeah. And I think a lot of those things are really special, and they have to be kept because they're kind of fragile. And I love them more than my own ideas.
Yeah, I think that you're very good at making sense of things. I think a lot of this, when we started doing this together, it was kind of like making sense of, why would we even do it? What's interesting about it? And Kris did most of the work of this, but it was kind of like creating like a logic or a reason to the whole thing involving the history and why things are the way they are in this town. Why do people act the way they act? And yeah, the kids do that stuff. I think is pretty solid in our minds in terms of when we're working on the books. But how much the kids uncover of all that stuff, like the bottom part of the iceberg, still is kind of up in the air.
So, any more questions?
Thank you, Francois. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you guys too.
Dans le chat, il y a Monique qui a une question, puis il y a aussi, elle l'a pas posée, là, je pense qu'elle veut la poser en direct, puis il y a Iris qui a demandé à ce qu'on revoie les peintures. Dans le fond, il faudrait que les gars parlent quand ils montent leurs peintures, parce que c'est eux qui vont être en gros.
So there's one question which is like seeing the paintings again, so you need to speak while you're showing the paintings in order for them to be seen.
Okay, here I am speaking about the paintings. This is the first one that he, actually, this isn't the first one. I can show you another one.
Oh no, the prototype. Oh, okay, go ahead.
So this is not the cover, but it's sort of the prototype. And this was the idea. You can see it's not Hobtown. It's a teen detective club mystery, which is really a mouthful. That's my fault. And this was kind of the idea that we had for how things would work. And you can see that there's more cartooning here, and this is a lot more kind of fine art, which is to say it's about shapes and colors and ambiance more so than this, which is really about character. And there's even another one too that I have. But do you have anything to say about this, Alex?
No. I like seeing that stuff. And here's the hermit cover. Yeah, I feel I think I was more happy with the Case of the Missing Men cover, but you know, I'm fine with this, I guess. Yeah, it's one thing when we're doing that, when I'm coming up with the covers and me and Kris are talking about what we should show. I always love covers of anything, you know, like in comics and stuff, that does things in the covers that like doesn't happen in the book. That's just a fun thing to do to me. Like, what if a different thing, like in a different version, a universe of the story. So just doing stuff like having the character Kara here have a bow and arrow, that doesn't happen. But yeah, that's fun.
One of the things I love about that cover is I said to Alex, you're going to get to decide the color of the uniforms because our comics are in black and white. And so you don't know what color they are. But because Alex chose this amazing tangerine-y, what color would you describe it as, Alex?
Yeah, I got something like that, gold, like almost. Yeah, yes. I asked my partner Rebecca, like, that kind of, we're going through colors together. I was like, what's a gross color? She has a better sense of like fashion and stuff. Like, what would be this kind of like an unsettling cover for a bunch of boys to wear? And that's one of the colors she came up with.
Yeah, it's great.
So any more questions?
Oh, we got
here's
Monique.
No, that's fine. There's me wanting to ask a question.
Yeah.
Wait.
I'm
gonna read your book in French, and I have to say that I'm Alexandre's father.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
what? It's all in the nose.
You know.
What I'm interested in is what you guys thought when you were offered, or whatever, I mean, discussions there were about your book being translated in French. And I mean, it for an author, I mean, there's I don't know how much of French you can speak, but I mean, is there a kind of fear that your book would be kind of so different that you wouldn't recognize it? Or, I mean, what was your first thought about being translated in another language, whatever language, French or German or whatever, Italian?
If I may.
And Alexandre's mother has something else.
Yes.
Has more French, to add.
There's the saying, traduire, c'est trahir.
Yes.
Translation is treason.
So
what do you think about it?
And I should add on this that, I mean, Alexandre has been in his youth he has had to watch all the James
Bond. So the question is,
movies in French.
She's dying over here.
All right. So, what was the first thought when you were translating?
Come on, guy. And as he grew up, I mean, he convinced me that, I mean, listening to a movie that was, I mean, say, filmed in English, listening to the translation was kind of a no thing, yeah. So I'm curious to see what you guys had. What were your impressions about being translated in another language?
I was really excited about it, and we met Alexandre, and he seemed very passionate and really engaged with the work. So I had no fears whatsoever, and especially Pow Pow is their books are great and they're beautiful too. The objects themselves were something that we responded really well to, and obviously it's nice to have a bigger readership. One of the questions I had was, because they are similar to Nancy Drew and some books that maybe aren't as part of French culture, especially Quebecois Francophone culture, I was worried that it wouldn't sort of translate in terms of the cultural signifiers of something like Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys. And I think when you look at French reviews, they call it les quatre A. Is that it? The four aces? Is that? Yeah. So it ends up being related to a different tradition that we aren't really from, but there's still a way in. So I feel good about it.
Yeah, when we met Luc and Alexandre, I could tell that they understood the book. So then I just knew it was Alexandre's job to figure out how to do that, and I think it was probably quite a challenge. But I trusted. I didn't have any doubt there, and it's just, when you make something, you want as many people as possible to read it, and you don't want that to be limited by language. Our publisher Conundrum sold the rights to the Spanish rights, so that'll happen. It's out of our hands. I guess I try not to worry about it at all, really. I'm just excited that other people will see it, and I think it's inevitable. Like you mentioned, like when you watch a movie that's supposed to be in another language and you're getting kind of a translation. Generally you want to do it in subtitles. I think generally that's going to be a better translation. I think it's just going to happen, that maybe something will be kind of missing. But I don't worry too much about it. I think the essence of the story will still be there. Yeah. And by the way, Kris grew up. I don't speak any French whatsoever, even though we grew up in New Brunswick, which is like the only officially bilingual province in the country. Yep. I'm very Anglo, but Kris's father is French, so he grew up learning French.
Okay, well, thank you.
To me, it's very much like reading the script of a movie.
Yeah, or like a storyboard.
Is it the same to you?
Well, Kris writes the script somewhat like a movie, but the script is just for me. So some of the parts in it only I would understand. But yeah, it is like that, and I do think of it kind of as a movie in a way. When I think of cartooning and when I think of drawing characters, I definitely think of them as actors, and I'm not a very good actor myself, but I do think of acting when I'm doing it.
And in that perspective, to me, I asked myself if it was especially challenging as far as portraying was concerned, because when you have to follow the drawn face of someone from one little box to the other, is it really the same person? I thought it must be very challenging as a portrayer to.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it is. You're always kind of worried, and I do think that in that first book that you're holding, the characters do kind of look different sometimes in different parts of the book. But as things go along, I did get a better sense of how to draw them, and they look more consistent kind of later on in the second book. I felt really kind of awful about that, but I've heard many other comic artists kind of express the same woes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Are there any more questions? If not, maybe I can show the books one last time.
I have one more if it's okay.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Alex, I was just remembering in the second book, the like dream sequences, there's such a crazy change in style and it's so interesting to see. I was just wondering what it was. Like, are those still ink drawings? How'd you figure that out, that style? Also curious what some of your favorite graphic novels might be.
What was the last part?
What some of your favorite graphic novels are.
Oh, yeah, well, so do you mean when things get kind of, when there's like actual like gradients and stuff? When things...
Yeah, I lent the copies out, otherwise I'd hold it up, but there's those things, and there's a panel with like a baby's face, and it's, like kind of shiny looking.
Yeah, that call. Yeah, one of the... Kris did some sick research to find that kind of thing out. Yeah, that was done a lot. Like I would do like ink, kind of watercolorish kind of paintings for some of it, and some of it was like charcoal, whatever I kind of thought I needed, and then I would kind of put that through digitally to make it look with the little, the little points. So yeah, I in that one I did want to broaden my horizons a little bit from just doing line work, and that's something that I want to keep trying to do, is making small adjustments at appropriate times when things get weird in future books.
I think it was super effective. Like I haven't seen anything like that. It was really cool.
It's good to hear. I have, yeah, it's I'm always wondering when I'm doing it how it'll read. And as far as the books that I like, one of my favorite books is I Never Liked You by Chester Brown. Chester Brown was a big influence, and I think you can see that in some of those parts, like, with his like Yummy Fur stuff and things like that. Yeah, he's a big influence. I mean, there are the obvious ones. I reread like Watchmen like every few years. A lot of Alan Moore stuff is that's kind of like, when I think of these kind of things, like who do I give, what books do I give to people when I want to introduce them to comics? And you got like your Black Hole, things like that, like the big ones. Yeah, I'm really bad for not reading enough comics when I'm making comics though. So
cool, thanks.
I was going to say, one of the interesting things Alex did with some of his dream sequences is he painted with white on black, and then he inverted it to give it that kind of washed out feeling. There's a lot of really interesting stuff he did, especially in the second one.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, no, it's totally unique and weird and beautiful. I love it.
Some cute kids.
Yeah, I think my connection is slowly dying out here. So yeah, it tells me that my connection is unstable. So maybe if there are any more questions, we can take them. If not, thank you guys so much for this. This has been like super generous and super interesting, and it's been really nice meeting you for a longer time. And I hope you can come to Quebec soon to do like signings and stuff, because we've now have like 2 books we haven't launched here, and we need to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexander. This is my favorite one of these I've ever done. This was really nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it can feel really stifling to be in these fish tanks, but this was very nice. So thank you very much, and we'll see you once we get our vaccines.
Yeah, I guess so. All right.
All right.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.